Easier than I thought, Marcus said, capping his pen with a smile while signing away 9 years of my life. Honestly, I almost feel bad for her. Almost. He laughed. His attorney laughed. And the woman in the red dress sitting behind him, his girlfriend, laughed loudest of all. I sat across that courtroom table with nothing. No job, no money, no power. Exactly the way he had planned it. Then my attorney stood up and said 4 words that stopped every sound in that room cold. There is one more thing. And the judge began reading my dead father's will out loud. Subscribe right now and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The pen scratched across that paper like it was the easiest thing Marcus had ever done in his life. I watched his hand move across the signature line, and I thought about all the other papers he had signed over 9 years. The marriage certificate, the mortgage, the joint tax returns. Every single one of them had felt like a promise. This one felt like an eviction notice. He capped the pen, leaned back in his chair, and smiled at his attorney, a polished man named Gerald Whitmore who billed $850 an hour and had the particular confidence of someone who had never once been surprised by the outcome of anything he touched. Easier than I thought, Marcus said, just loud enough for me to hear. Honestly, Gerald, I expected more resistance. I kept my hands folded in my lap. I pressed my thumbnail into my palm so hard it left a crescent mark. I did not look away from the table in front of me. I would not give him the satisfaction of seeing my face break. Marcus, Judge Diana Foster's voice came down from the bench like a temperature drop. These are formal proceedings. Both parties will conduct themselves accordingly. Of course, Your Honor. He straightened his jacket. My apologies. I just meant we've been waiting a long time for this. I think Sophia will be much better off. This is the right thing for everyone. That sentence. I have turned it over in my mind 100 times since that morning. And every time I do, I feel the same thing I felt then. Not just anger, but a kind of cold clarity. Because that was Marcus in a single sentence. He had spent 9 years doing things that hurt me and framing every single one of them as something he was doing for my benefit. He wasn't divorcing me because he was cruel. He was liberating me. My attorney, Eleanor Webb, sat beside me. She was in her early 60s, gray-haired, soft-spoken, and sharp in the way that quiet people often are. The sharpness you don't see until the moment it matters. She had taken my case on a deeply reduced payment plan. She had told me from the beginning, Sophia, I need you to understand what we're walking into. Marcus has money, preparation, and a legal team that has done this exact thing many times before. We are not walking in as equals. I had told her I understood. What I had not fully understood was how it would feel to sit in that room and watch Marcus perform certainty. The way a man performs certainty when he has spent months making sure the outcome is already decided before anyone shows up to argue about it. The settlement his team had proposed was presented to Judge Foster with the language of generosity. I would receive the house in Frisco, the house that had been refinanced twice to fund Marcus's business, which meant I would inherit a mortgage that outweighed the market value by nearly $40,000. I would receive the 2019 Honda Accord with 87,000 miles on it and a check engine light that had been glowing orange for 3 months. I would receive $1,800 a month in spousal support. $1,800 in Dallas, Texas, in the year that groceries and utilities and health insurance had become what they had become. Marcus, meanwhile, would keep Langston Strategic Group, his consulting firm, which had grown from a 2-person operation in our guest bedroom to a 12-employee company with government contracts and corporate retainer clients. He would keep the Range Rover. He would keep the boat he had docked at Lake Louisville and visited 4 times in the past year. He would keep the retirement accounts. And he would keep whatever was in the structures his attorneys had helped him build offshore, structures that I only knew existed because I had overheard him describe them in intimate detail to the woman sitting in the 3rd row of the gallery. I glanced back at her without meaning to. Victoria Harmon was wearing a cream-wrapped dress and heeled boots, her dark auburn hair styled in that deliberately casual way that requires 40 minutes to produce. She had her phone in her hand. She looked like a woman who was deciding whether to start recording. She had been Marcus's executive assistant for 2 years. She was the person who had called me at the company Christmas party 2 Decembers ago, touched my arm and said, warmly and with complete sincerity, "Marcus talks about you constantly. You must be so proud of everything he's built." I had said yes. I had meant it. I hadn't understood then that she was taking inventory. "Mrs. Langston," Judge Foster was addressing me. I straightened immediately. "Is there anything you'd like to say before we move toward finalization of these proceedings?" I opened my mouth. I thought about 9 years. I thought about the marketing job I had left. A real job, a salary, benefits, a professional identity I had spent 4 years building before Marcus sat me down over dinner one evening and told me, gently and convincingly, that my career was creating stress that was holding both of us back, that I had talent I was wasting in someone else's office, that if I stepped back, went freelance, became more flexible, he could build something big enough for both of us. I had believed him. "No, Your Honor," I said. My voice came out smaller than I wanted it to. Marcus exhaled quietly. It wasn't a sigh of relief. It was the exhale of a man confirming something he already knew. He turned slightly toward Whitmore and said, just under his breath, "Told you." That was the moment I came the closest to cracking. Not from grief, from something harder to name, the particular humiliation of being predicted, of being so well mapped by the person who was supposed to know you best that your pain had already been factored into his timeline. Eleanor's hand moved. She placed a single sheet of paper face down on the table in front of her, quietly, without drawing attention to it. I didn't know what it was, but I saw something shift in the way she was sitting, a small, deliberate squaring of the shoulders, the posture of someone stepping into a moment they have been preparing for. "Your Honor," Eleanor said, rising from her chair, "before we proceed to finalization, there is one additional matter that requires the court's attention." Whitmore's head turned immediately. "This is highly irregular. All relevant disclosures have already been submitted and reviewed by both—" "It concerns an inheritance from Mrs. Langston's late father," Eleanor continued, her voice unhurried and completely level. "Specifically, the last will and testament of James Earl Carter, which was never properly executed following his passing 4 years ago due to documented administrative delays in the county probate system." The room shifted. It is hard to explain what I mean by that. Nothing moved. The air didn't change. But something in the quality of the silence became different. The way the silence in a room changes when someone says something that every person present instantly understands is important. Marcus turned and looked at me. It was the first time since I'd sat down across from him that the smile was gone from his face entirely. Then he found it again, or something like it, a sharper version. The smile of someone who has just been offered what he believes is a bluff and intends to call it. "Her father?" He said it almost lightly, like the idea was mildly amusing. Then he let the full weight of what he thought he knew drop into his voice. "Gerald, her dad was a truck mechanic who lived in a rental house in Garland. There's nothing to execute." "Mr. Langston," Judge Foster's tone carried the kind of quiet that is colder than volume, "you will address this court, not opposing counsel, and I would advise you to consider your words more carefully going forward." He sat back. But I saw it. I saw the moment the smile did not fully return. "Mrs. Webb," Judge Foster said, "what documentation are you prepared to present?" Eleanor placed a folder into the bailiff's hands. It was not thin. "Your Honor, the full estate documentation is contained here, including the original will, the probate record, and accompanying asset verification. Given the scope and complexity of what these documents contain, we respectfully request that the court grant a 1-week recess to allow for proper review before any settlement is finalized." Whitmore was on his feet. "Your Honor, this is a delay tactic. Any inheritance would have been processed years ago. The timing of this submission on the day of finalization is not a coincidence." The timing, Eleanor said calmly, is a function of administrative delays in the probate system that are fully documented in this filing. The will was submitted following Mr. Carter's death. The processing errors are on record. These are not invented obstacles, Mr. Whitmore. They are verifiable facts. Judge Foster had opened the folder. She was reading. The room was quiet except for the sound of pages turning and faintly the sound of Marcus's breathing, which had become slightly less even than it had been 20 minutes ago when he had walked into this room absolutely certain of the outcome. "This is highly irregular," Whitmore muttered. He was still on his feet, but the authority had gone out of his posture. Judge Foster looked up. "Given the nature and apparent scope of this documentation," she said, "I am granting the requested recess. This court will reconvene in 7 days to allow for proper examination of Mr. Carter's estate materials. At that time, both parties should be prepared to address how the inheritance affects the division of assets in this proceeding. Your Honor, this is Mr. Whitmore?" One look. That was all. "We are adjourned." The gavel came down. I watched Marcus's face in the 2 seconds that followed, the 2 seconds before he composed himself, before the professional mask came back up. In those 2 seconds, I saw something I had genuinely never seen on him before. He did not look angry. He did not look dismissive. He looked uncertain. In 9 years, I had watched Marcus walk into rooms full of people smarter and more powerful than him and walk out with exactly what he came for. I had watched him negotiate contracts that other people said couldn't be won. I had watched him absorb setbacks and turn them into pivots so smoothly that you almost forgot there had been a setback at all. Marcus Langston's defining characteristic, the one I had fallen in love with and the one that had ultimately destroyed us, was the absolute, unshakable belief that he was always going to be the smartest person doing the most thorough preparation in any room he entered. He had not prepared for this. I stood up from the table, picked up my bag, and straightened my blazer. Eleanor was already at my elbow, gathering her papers with the calm efficiency of someone who has just done exactly what she came to do. "Sophia," Marcus said. I did not turn around. I walked out of that courtroom ahead of him for the first time in 9 years. And as the door closed behind me, I heard Victoria Harmon's heels moving quickly toward the exit on the other side of the gallery. And I thought, run. Because when we come back in 7 days, there will be nothing left to run toward. Let me tell you what Marcus never knew about my father. He never knew because he had decided what my father was in approximately the first 15 minutes of meeting him. And once Marcus Langston decided something, he did not revisit the decision. My father was a truck mechanic. He drove an old Ford F-150. He lived in a rental house in Garland and wore the same brand of work boots every year and bought them on sale in November. He was a quiet man who spoke carefully and listened more than he talked, which Marcus had always interpreted as simplicity. Marcus had shaken my father's hand at our wedding with the particular brand of warmth that wealthy people perform toward people they consider beneath them. Generous, genuine-seeming, and entirely condescending. He had called my father Sir all evening, which Dad had acknowledged with a small private smile that I had not understood at the time. I understood it later. Dad died 4 years ago. A heart attack, sudden and without warning, on a Tuesday morning in March. He was 67 years old. He had been healthy as far as anyone knew. The call came from his neighbor at 7:15 in the morning, and I remember every detail of the 32 minutes between answering that call and arriving at his house. What song was on the radio, what the light looked like, the way Marcus drove slightly too fast and kept one hand on my shoulder across the center console, and how I had been grateful for that hand without noticing that it was one of the last times he would touch me like I was something he genuinely wanted to protect. At the funeral, Marcus had stood beside me perfectly. He had said all the right things. He had helped me write the obituary and had been patient during the 2 weeks afterward when I barely functioned. He had not complained about the grief. He had not told me to move on faster than I was ready to. In that specific period, he had been a good husband. What he had not done was encourage me to go through Dad's belongings. When I suggested it 3 months after the funeral, he had said gently, "You don't have to rush into that. It'll keep." And then 6 months later, when I mentioned it again, "Whenever you're ready, babe, no pressure." And then gradually, in the way that things become normal without anyone deciding they should, the boxes of my father's possessions had moved from the guest room to the garage storage unit, and I had stopped thinking about them the way you stop thinking about a wound that has finally become scar tissue. That was not an accident. I did not understand that yet, sitting in my car in the courthouse parking lot on the afternoon after our first hearing. I was still assembling the picture, still fitting pieces together. What I did know, what Eleanor had told me, carefully and clearly at our very first meeting, was that somewhere in my father's belongings there might be something that mattered. "People have assets their families never know about," she had said. "Go through his papers, all of them." Marcus's Range Rover pulled out of the parking structure and turned left onto Commerce Street without stopping. I sat in my Honda with the engine off and watched it go. Then I called Eleanor. "He's scared," I said. "Did you see his face?" "I saw it," she said. "Is that good?" "That depends entirely on what's in those boxes, Sophia." She paused. "Go home. Go through everything. Tonight. Every single piece of paper. Every card, every receipt, every note. Don't skip anything. And call me the moment you find something you don't recognize." I drove home. I made myself eat half a sandwich standing over the kitchen sink because I knew I needed to eat, and I didn't have the patience to sit down. I waited until I was certain Marcus would not be coming back. His text at 6:15 said he was going to a client dinner, which meant he was going to Victoria's apartment, which meant I had until at least 10 o'clock. I went to the garage. 3 boxes, labeled in my own handwriting. Dad, papers. Dad, personal. Dad, misc. I started with papers. The first thing I found that I didn't recognize was a business card. Clean white stock, gold embossed lettering. Crawford and Associates Real Estate Development. On the back, in my father's small, neat handwriting, 30% equity, see folder 4, renewal clause 2021. I set it aside and reached back into the box. Another card, Meridian Commercial Holdings. On the back, Phase 2 draw schedule, confirm with Raymond before signing. Another, Riverview Property Management Group. On the back, monthly distributions, account 4471, routing attached. I spread them out on the garage floor in front of me. 12 cards, 12 companies, every single one with notes on the back in my father's writing. Dollar amounts, percentages, account numbers, dates that ran across years. My hands had started shaking before I reached the appointment book. It was leather-bound, dark brown, worn at the corners from years of use. I opened it to January of the last year of Dad's life and began reading. Monday, 7 a.m., Crawford Sidewalk, McKinney Avenue. Tuesday, 2 p.m., Raymond Foster, Estate Planning Revision. Thursday, 9 a.m., Meridian Board Call. Friday, 3 p.m., Foster and Partners, R.E., Sophia's Future Protections. I stopped. R.E., Sophia's Future Protections. The date was 8 months before he died. I sat down on the cold garage floor because my legs had decided they were done supporting me for the moment. I sat there and I held that appointment book and I read that one line over and over. R.E., Sophia's Future Protections. He had known. Not the specifics, not Marcus's name written on a court document, not the affair, not the offshore accounts. He could not have known any of that. But he had known something, in the way that fathers who pay attention always know something. He had been sitting in an attorney's office 8 months before his heart gave out, discussing how to protect me from a future he hoped would never arrive. I kept searching. The bank statements were in a manila envelope at the bottom of the first box, folded in thirds, and held together with a rubber band that had dried and cracked with age. I unfolded them one by one. Monthly deposits, recurring, consistent, growing over 12 years. Crawford Holdings, Meridian LLC, Carter and Riverview LLC. Carter. His name. His name was on one of the company names. I found the incorporation papers 40 minutes later. James Earl Carter, founding partner. Carter and Meridian Construction, LLC. James Earl Carter, 30% equity holder, Crawford & Associates Real Estate. James Earl Carter, 25% equity holder, Riverview Property Management. Not an employee, not a contractor, a partner, an owner. My father, who had driven a second-hand truck and bought his work boots on sale, had been a partner in multiple companies for over a decade. At the very bottom of the third box, in an envelope sealed with tape that had yellowed at the edges, my name was written on the front in his handwriting. Not Sophia Langston, Sophia Ann Carter, my maiden name. I opened it. The letter was 5 pages, handwritten on legal pad paper, and it began, "My sweet Sophia, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and it also means something in your life has broken open badly enough that you finally went looking." I read it 3 times without moving. The third time, I wasn't crying anymore. I was thinking. At the bottom of the last page, below his signature, there was a business card paper-clipped to the letter. Raymond Foster, retired circuit judge. Foster and Partners, estate and business law. And beside the business card, a handwritten note. Call him. He has been waiting for you. I looked at my phone. It was 9:47 p.m. I dialed. It rang twice. Foster and Partners, a man's voice said, calm, measured, slightly formal, the voice of someone accustomed to receiving calls that carry significant weight. "My name is Sophia Carter," I said. My voice was completely steady. "I'm James Carter's daughter. I think it's time we talked." There was a pause. Then the voice warmed in a way that told me, immediately and without any remaining doubt, that this call had been anticipated for a very long time. "Miss Carter," Raymond Foster said, "we have been waiting for your call. How soon can you come in?" In the garage, surrounded by 12 years of my father's quiet, invisible work, I felt something unlock inside my chest that I had not realized had been locked. Marcus had walked into that courtroom this morning with 9 years of preparation behind him and the absolute certainty that he knew exactly who I was, exactly what I had, and exactly how this was going to end. He did not know my father. He did not know me. And in 7 days, he was going to find out exactly how wrong he had been about both of us. Raymond Foster's office was not what I expected, and somehow that made me trust him immediately. I had imagined something formal and imposing, the kind of office that announces its own importance before you sit down. What I found instead was a room full of books, real ones, with cracked spines and post-it notes sticking out of the pages, and a desk covered in organized stacks of folders that gave the impression of a man who worked constantly and didn't particularly care who knew it. He was in his early 70s, silver-haired, with the kind of stillness that belongs to people who have spent decades in rooms where other people were losing their composure. He stood when I walked in and extended his hand, and the way he looked at me, directly, warmly, with something that was almost recognition, told me before a single word was spoken that he had been expecting this moment for a long time. "You look like your mother," he said. "Your father showed me photographs every chance he got." I sat down across from him and pressed my hands flat on my knees to keep them steady. "How long did you know him?" 15 years. He settled back in his chair. He called me out of the blue one afternoon. Said a friend had recommended me, that he had some money he'd saved and some ideas about what to do with it, and that he needed someone he could trust completely. He was 52 years old. He had been building quietly for years before he ever walked through my door. He paused. "He was one of the most remarkable people I ever had the privilege of working with, Sophia. I want you to know that before we get into anything else." My throat tightened. He never told me. He was very specific about that. He did not want you to know. Raymond leaned forward and placed both hands on the desk. He wanted you to become yourself first. He said, and I'm quoting him exactly because I wrote it down, "I want Sophia to know who she is before she knows what she has. Otherwise, she'll spend her whole life wondering if she would have been the same person without the money. I want her to know she would have been, because she already is." I did not trust myself to speak for about 15 seconds. "Okay," I finally said. "Show me." Raymond opened the folder. The first number he showed me was the current valuation of my father's commercial real estate holdings. 7 buildings in the DFW metro area. Current combined market value, $4.8 million. I stared at it. "Keep going," I said. Partnership interests in 2 regional construction firms, $2.1 million. Equity position in a property management company overseeing 340 rental units across Collin and Dallas counties, $1.4 million. Liquid investment accounts managed through a private wealth management firm, $700,000. Total estate value, just under $9 million. The number sat on the page in black ink, and I looked at it and thought about my father buying his work boots on sale in November, and I felt something crack open in the center of my chest that I didn't have a name for. It wasn't grief exactly. It was bigger than grief and older than grief, and it had my father's handwriting all over it. "There's one more thing," Raymond said, and something in his voice made me look up. "I want you to see this before anything else." He turned the folder to a specific page and pushed it across the desk toward me. It was a property listing, 4718 McKinney Avenue, Uptown Dallas. Commercial office building, 4 stories. Current tenant list attached. 4th floor, Langston Strategic Group. I read it twice. Then I looked up at Raymond. My father owned Marcus's building. "For the past 3 years," Raymond said. "The lease was processed through Riverview Property Management, which is one of your father's holding structures. Marcus has been writing a check every month to a management company that has been routing those funds directly into your father's estate accounts." He let that land for a moment. "Your father was not unaware of where Marcus was operating." I sat back in my chair. "He knew," I said. "He knew about Marcus." "He suspected." Raymond's voice was careful. "Your father was a thorough man. He did not ignore things that concerned him." He reached for a second folder, thicker than the first, and placed it in front of me. 14 months before he died, your father commissioned a comprehensive review of your husband's business practices and personal conduct. Licensed investigators, entirely legal. Every document in this file was obtained through proper channels with clean chain of custody. I opened the folder. The offshore accounts were documented in detail. Cayman Islands, a secondary account through a Delaware shell company, cash flows that had been deliberately obscured from official reporting over 3 years. The total amount moved through these structures, approximately $480,000 that Marcus had never disclosed to me, to his business partners, or to any tax authority. And then the photographs. I closed that section without looking at more than 3 of them. I didn't need to. The dates on the ones I'd seen told me everything. The relationship between Marcus and Victoria had begun 11 months before the Christmas party, where she told me warmly how much he talked about me. It had been running, fully established, and deliberately hidden for the entire last year of our marriage, while I cooked his dinners and helped him prep for client meetings and told myself the distance between us was just stress. "I've seen enough," I said. "You don't need to look at all of it," Raymond agreed. "You just need to know it exists and that it's admissible." "Is it enough?" My voice came out steadier than I felt. "In court, is this actually enough to change what happens?" Raymond looked at me over the top of his glasses with the expression of a man who has been waiting a long time to deliver a specific piece of news to a specific person. Sophia, when we walk back into that courtroom in 6 days, your husband is going to discover that the woman he believed had no resources and no leverage is actually the wealthier party in this divorce by a margin he cannot negotiate his way out of. He is also going to discover that we have documented evidence of criminal financial fraud that could result in federal charges. He paused. Yes, it's enough. I called Eleanor from the parking garage. She answered on the first ring. Tell me. $9 million, I said. Silence for 3 full seconds. Then, say that again? My father's estate is valued at just under $9 million. Commercial real estate, business partnerships, investment accounts. Raymond Foster has everything documented. And Eleanor? I stopped walking. Marcus has been paying rent to my father's estate for 3 years. He's been writing checks to a management company that was routing money directly to my father. He doesn't know. Another silence. Then Eleanor exhaled slowly, the exhale of a woman recalibrating every calculation she had made about this case. Sophia, listen to me very carefully. You do not tell Marcus any of this. You do not change your behavior. You go home tonight and you act like the last 8 hours did not happen. Can you do that? Yes, I said. Are you sure? I thought about Marcus sitting across that mahogany table with his easy smile saying, easier than I thought. I thought about Victoria in her cream dress watching from the gallery. I thought about my father in a lawyer's office 8 months before he died, talking about my future protections. I'm sure, I said. When I got home, Marcus was already there, which I hadn't expected. He was on the couch with his laptop open and a glass of bourbon on the coffee table, and he looked up when I came in with an expression that was trying very hard to be neutral. Where have you been? He asked. Running errands. I set my bag on the kitchen counter and didn't turn around. I needed to get out of the house after this morning. Yeah, he closed the laptop. About this morning. That inheritance thing Eleanor brought up. What is she even talking about? Your dad's been gone 4 years. There's nothing left to probate. I turned around then. I looked at him directly. I don't know the details yet. Eleanor is looking into it. It's a stall tactic. He said it firmly, the way he said things when he needed to convince himself as much as he needed to convince me. Whitmore says it's nothing. They're just trying to drag this out. Maybe, I said. He studied my face. Marcus was not a stupid man. He had built a successful business on his ability to read people and situations accurately, and I watched him doing exactly that, scanning my expression, measuring my tone, looking for whatever was different. I kept my face quiet and my breathing even, and I thought about my father's handwriting on that appointment book, and I gave Marcus absolutely nothing to read. You okay? He finally asked. I will be, I said, which was true, just not in the way he understood it. I went to bed early. Marcus stayed up. I lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling and thought about what Raymond had told me as I was leaving his office. The thing he'd said last, quietly, after everything else. Your father also left a letter, Raymond had said, sealed. He asked me to read it aloud in court if you ever faced a legal proceeding in which someone tried to exploit your perceived vulnerability. He was very specific. It had to be read aloud, in the courtroom, in front of whoever was attempting to take advantage of you. He had looked at me steadily. He wanted them to hear it, not just you. I had asked what the letter said. Raymond had smiled. You'll hear it when the time comes. That's how he wanted it. I thought about that for a long time in the dark. I thought about my father working the overnight shift for 25 years, clocking in at 11 p.m., cleaning floors and emptying trash in office buildings while the city slept, and then driving home at 7 a.m. and making me breakfast before school. And somewhere in all of that, in the margins of a life that looked completely ordinary from the outside, building something that would protect me long after he was gone. Marcus thought he had mapped every variable. He thought he had accounted for everything. He had never accounted for my father. The next 6 days were the longest of my life, and I did not waste a single hour of them. Eleanor and Raymond worked in parallel, coordinating the presentation of the estate documentation with a precision that I found both reassuring and slightly intimidating. I met with Eleanor every morning and Raymond every afternoon. In the evenings, I went home and cooked dinner and sat across from Marcus and answered his questions in short sentences and watched him grow incrementally more anxious as the week passed without any information about what Eleanor's team was actually sitting on. On the third day, Marcus asked me to consider dropping the inheritance complication and finalizing the divorce as originally proposed. "It'll be faster," he said, "cleaner. Whatever your dad left, and I genuinely don't think it's much, we can sort it out afterward. It doesn't need to hold up the whole proceeding." I looked at him across the kitchen table. "I'll talk to Eleanor," I said. I did not talk to Eleanor about it. I talked to Eleanor about the final preparation for the hearing and the order in which we would present the documents and the specific language she planned to use when she introduced Raymond to the court. On the fifth day, Victoria Harmon texted Marcus from a number I had never seen before. I only knew because his phone lit up on the counter while he was in the shower, and I saw the preview before it locked. Just 4 words. "Is everything still okay?" He had not yet told her that things were not still okay. I thought about that while I stood in the kitchen and listened to the water running upstairs. He was still managing his 2 separate lives, still keeping Victoria calm and confident while quietly dealing with the uncertainty I had introduced into his timeline. That was Marcus at his most characteristic, the ability to maintain multiple narratives simultaneously, to keep every room believing what he needed them to believe. But the thing about running parallel narratives is that it requires you to always know more than the people you're managing. It requires information superiority. And as of the morning I had called Raymond Foster from the garage, Marcus had lost his information advantage completely, without knowing it. The night before the hearing, I sat at the kitchen table alone after Marcus went to bed, and I took my father's letter out of my bag, and I read the last paragraph one more time. "Whoever is standing across from you right now, whoever made you desperate enough to go through these boxes, I want you to know one thing. You are James Carter's daughter. I raised you on purpose. Everything I built pointing toward you. Go get what's yours, sweetheart, and don't you dare apologize for it." I folded the letter, put it in my jacket pocket, went to bed. In 6 hours, Marcus Langston was going to walk into a courtroom believing he had already won. He was going to spend the next several hours discovering, piece by piece, exactly how wrong he had been about my father, about me, about what it actually costs to underestimate a woman who comes from the kind of love that plans 20 years ahead. I was ready. I woke up at 5:15 without an alarm. Marcus was still asleep. I could hear his breathing, slow, even. The breathing of a man who had gone to bed certain that whatever surprise Eleanor Webb had manufactured would dissolve under Whitmore's legal firepower, the same way every other obstacle in his life had dissolved. Marcus had always slept well before big days. It was one of the things I had once admired about him, the ability to compartmentalize so completely that uncertainty simply did not follow him into sleep. I got dressed in the guest bathroom. Navy blazer, dark slacks, the simple pearl earrings my father had given me on my college graduation day. I looked at myself in the mirror for a long moment and said out loud, quietly, to no one but myself, "You know what's in that room today. He doesn't. Remember that every time he looks at you." I went downstairs and made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with my father's letter in my hands one last time. I didn't read it. I just held it. The paper had softened slightly from how many times I had folded and unfolded it over the past week, and I could feel my father's handwriting under my fingertips, like something with texture and weight. I heard Marcus come downstairs at 6:40. He was dressed sharply, the charcoal suit, the good tie, the cufflinks I had given him for our 5th anniversary. He looked like a man walking into a negotiation he intended to win, which was exactly what he believed he was doing. "Coffee's fresh," I said. "Thanks," He poured a cup and leaned against the counter and looked at me with an expression I had seen before, the one where he was deciding how much information to offer and how much to keep. Whitmore says today is going to be straightforward. Whatever Eleanor is presenting, he's confident it won't change the material outcome. Okay, I said. You're not worried? I looked at him over my coffee cup. I've stopped worrying, Marcus. Whatever happens today, happens. He studied my face the way he had been studying it all week, looking for the seam, the place where what I was showing him came apart and revealed what I was actually thinking. He didn't find it. I had spent 9 years learning to be unreadable when I needed to be, and I had practiced this particular expression in the mirror every morning for 6 days. Okay, he said finally, and drank his coffee. We drove to the courthouse separately. I had asked for that weeks ago during the initial filing, and Marcus had agreed easily because it served his image, the amicable uncoupling, the civilized adults. I sat in my Honda in the parking structure for 4 minutes after I parked, breathing deliberately the way Eleanor had taught me. In through the nose, count to 4, out through the mouth, count to 6. Do it until your hands stop shaking. My hands stopped shaking. I got out of the car and walked toward the courthouse entrance, and Raymond Foster was getting out of a black sedan 20 feet ahead of me, briefcase in hand, silver hair catching the morning light. He turned and saw me and gave me one firm nod. Nothing more, everything necessary. Eleanor was waiting just inside the entrance. She looked at me the way a surgeon looks at a patient they have prepared thoroughly and trust completely. Ready? Tell me one more time, I said. The order. Whitmore presents their settlement first. We let him finish completely. Do not react. Do not move. Let him build his whole case. Then I rise and introduce the estate documentation. Raymond approaches the bench when Judge Foster invites him. He presents the asset summary first, then the business holdings, then the building. She paused. Then the letter. The letter last, I confirmed. The letter last. Your father wanted it that way. He wanted everything else to land first, so that by the time his words were read aloud, Marcus would already understand exactly what he was hearing. I thought about my father planning the sequence of this moment from 15 years away, ordering his own posthumous testimony like a closing argument. I pressed my lips together and nodded once. Let's go. The courtroom was the same room, the same configuration, the same mahogany furniture and fluorescent gravity, but the energy was different from the first hearing. I felt it the moment I walked through the door. The difference between a room full of people who all believe the outcome is decided and a room where at least some of the people know it isn't. Marcus was already at the plaintiff's table with Whitmore, both of them with the arranged calm of people performing confidence. Whitmore was reviewing a document and making margin notes, the gesture of a man going through motions he has gone through hundreds of times. Marcus had his hands folded on the table and his eyes on the door, and when I walked in, he tracked me across the room with an expression I couldn't fully read, something between assessment and residual guilt, and the forced neutrality of a man who needs the next few hours to go according to his plan. In the gallery, second row, Raymond Foster sat with his briefcase across his knees and his hands folded on top of it, perfectly still. Third row from the back, Victoria Harmon. Different dress today, dark green, more subdued than the cream from last week. She had her phone already out. She caught my eye for exactly 1 second and looked away first. Judge Diana Foster entered at 9 o'clock, and the room stood and settled, and the formalities proceeded with the brisk efficiency of a court that has no interest in wasting time. "We're reconvened in Langston versus Langston," Judge Foster said, opening the file in front of her. "Mr. Whitmore, you indicated last week that your client wished to maintain his original settlement proposal. Please proceed." Whitmore rose with the smooth confidence of someone stepping onto familiar ground. He presented the settlement in clear, organized language: the house, the Honda, the spousal support, the division of disclosed assets. He used the word generous 3 times. He used the phrase more than fair twice. He described Marcus as a self-made businessman who had built his company through personal sacrifice and hard work, and he described me, without ever using my name unkindly, as a spouse who had chosen not to pursue independent professional development during the marriage. The implication was clean and deliberate. Marcus had built everything. I had contributed very little. The settlement reflected that reality. Marcus nodded along slightly, the small, approving nods of a man listening to his own story told correctly. Whitmore concluded with a half-bow toward the bench. Your Honor, my client has been more than accommodating in these proceedings. We respectfully ask the court to finalize this settlement today. Judge Foster looked at him. Then she looked at me. Mrs. Webb? Eleanor stood up. Your Honor, she said, and her voice carried the specific, quiet authority of someone who has been waiting for exactly this moment. The settlement as presented by Mr. Whitmore is based on a materially incomplete picture of this case. Specifically, it fails to account for the full financial position of my client, Sophia Carter Langston, and it fails to account for the full extent of Mr. Langston's own financial disclosures. Whitmore was on his feet. Your Honor, opposing counsel has had months to... Mr. Whitmore. Judge Foster did not raise her voice. She simply stopped him with it. You'll have time to respond. Sit down. She turned back to Eleanor. Continue. Thank you, Your Honor. With the court's permission, I'd like to introduce the executor of Mr. James Carter's estate, who is present in the gallery and has documentation that is directly relevant to these proceedings. Judge Foster looked toward the gallery. Mr. Foster? Raymond stood, walked through the gate with the unhurried movement of a man who has appeared before courts for 40 years and feels at home in every single one, and positioned himself beside Eleanor at the table. He introduced himself. He stated his credentials: retired circuit judge, 15 years as executor of James Earl Carter's estate, licensed to practice estate and business law in the state of Texas. Marcus had gone very still. Mr. Foster, Judge Foster said, please present the estate documentation. Raymond opened his briefcase and removed the folder. He began with the property holdings. 7 commercial buildings in the DFW metro area. He named them one by one with addresses. Current combined valuation, $4.8 million. The courtroom was quiet. Partnership interests in Carter and Meridian Construction and Crawford and Associates Development. Combined valuation, $2.1 million. Equity position in Riverview Property Management, $1.4 million. Liquid investment and savings accounts, $700,000. Total current estate valuation, Raymond said, is approximately $9 million. All assets properly documented, all taxes current, all holdings legally structured and fully verifiable. And then he said it. Among the properties included in Mrs. Langston's inheritance is the commercial office building at 4718 McKinney Avenue in Uptown Dallas. Current tenant of record on the 4th floor of that building, Langston Strategic Group. The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. Marcus's hands unfolded from the table. He put them flat on the surface in front of him, like he needed something solid. I watched the color leave his face by degrees the way water drains. First from the forehead, then the jaw, then around the mouth, until what was left was something pale and unsteady that I had never once seen on Marcus Langston in 9 years of knowing him. He stopped himself, started again. That building is owned by Riverview Property Management. We researched the ownership before we signed the lease. It's a management company. It is, Raymond said calmly. Riverview Property Management is a holding entity of which James Earl Carter was the primary equity holder. For the past 3 years, your monthly lease payments have been routed through Riverview's accounts directly into Mr. Carter's estate. Mrs. Langston has, in effect, been your landlord since 2021. He paused. Mr. Carter was aware of the arrangement. Marcus turned and looked at me. I did not look away from him. I held his gaze, and I let him see exactly what I needed him to see. Not triumph, not cruelty, just the steady, clear-eyed look of a woman who finally understood the full scope of who she was and where she came from. Your Honor, Whitmore said, and for the first time his voice had lost its polish. We need a recess to— We're not recessing yet, Mr. Whitmore, Judge Foster said. Mrs. Webb, you indicated there was additional documentation. Yes, Your Honor. Eleanor placed the second folder in the bailiff's hands. This file contains documented evidence that Mr. Langston has been concealing marital assets during these proceedings. Offshore accounts holding approximately $480,000, routed through shell companies in Delaware and the Cayman Islands. We also have email correspondence between Mr. Langston and Miss Victoria Harmon, in which they explicitly discuss their strategy for minimizing Mrs. Langston's settlement and their shared certainty that she lacked the resources to contest it. From the third row, I heard a sharp intake of breath. I did not turn around. Marcus had stopped looking at me. He was looking at the folder now with the fixed, slightly unfocused stare of a man trying to calculate the distance between where he was standing and the nearest exit, and understanding with each passing second that the distance was greater than it had appeared. Whitmore leaned in and whispered urgently. Marcus shook his head once, a short, tight movement. Judge Foster read through the documentation in complete silence for 4 minutes. No one spoke. I counted my own heartbeats. I got to 214 before she looked up. Mr. Langston, she said, are you aware that deliberate concealment of marital assets in the state of Texas constitutes fraud? Marcus opened his mouth. Whitmore grabbed his forearm. Marcus closed his mouth. I'll interpret your silence as an acknowledgement that you understand the gravity of this situation. She set the folder down. Mr. Foster, you indicated you have one additional item to present. Yes, Your Honor. Raymond reached into the inner breast pocket of his jacket and removed a single, folded sheet of paper. He unfolded it carefully. Mr. Carter prepared this letter to be read aloud in any legal proceeding in which someone attempted to exploit his daughter's perceived financial vulnerability. He was very specific. He wanted it read in open court, in front of whoever was attempting to take advantage of her. He wanted them to hear it directly. Judge Foster nodded. Please read it. Raymond held the letter in both hands and read in a voice that was steady and clear and filled the room completely. To anyone who believes that Sophia Carter can be diminished, deceived, or left with nothing, you have made the most expensive mistake of your life. Not because of the money, because of who she is and where she comes from. I am James Earl Carter. I drove a truck, and I worked nights, and I lived in a rental house for 30 years. And I built something in this city that you walked past every day without knowing it was mine. I built it quietly, and I built it legally, and I built it pointing in one direction, toward my daughter. Sophia did not know about any of it. That was intentional. I wanted her to know her own strength before she knew her resources. I wanted her to build herself, her character, her values, her capacity to survive hard things, without the comfort of knowing there was a net below her. She did that. She did it without my money, and without my name on any door, and without knowing I was watching. If you are sitting in that courtroom right now believing you outmaneuvered a woman who had nothing, I need you to understand something. She never had nothing. She had me. And the city you are doing business in, the buildings you work in, the ground you are standing on, more of it belongs to her family than you ever imagined possible. Treat my daughter accordingly. Because James Carter's daughter is not a woman you get to walk away from clean. With all of my love and every bit of pride a father can carry, James Earl Carter. Raymond folded the letter. The room was completely silent. Then Marcus's chair scraped back from the table, and he turned and looked at me with an expression I will carry for the rest of my life. Not the smug confidence of the man who had signed those papers 6 weeks ago. Not the careful neutrality of the man who had studied my face across the kitchen table all week. But something stripped down and raw and entirely unmanaged. Something that looked, for the first time, like the real face of a man who finally understood what he had done. Sophia, he said. His voice was different. The performance was gone. I didn't know." "I know you didn't," I said, and I meant it both ways. He hadn't known about my father's estate, that much was clear. But he also hadn't known me, not really, not the person I actually was, beneath the version of myself I had quietly shrunk down to fit inside his life. And that not knowing had been a choice, even if he'd never framed it as one. "Mr. Langston," Judge Foster's voice cut across the moment cleanly, "I suggest you consult with your attorney. You have 10 minutes. Whitmore pulled Marcus toward the side of the room, and they stood together in urgent, low conversation while I sat at my table with my hands folded and my father's words still hanging in the air of that courtroom like something that had always been there, waiting to be spoken. Eleanor leaned close and said quietly, "He's going to fold." I nodded. I already knew. The 10 minutes Whitmore had been given stretched into 14, and every one of those 14 minutes told its own story. I watched Marcus from across the room without appearing to watch him. I had learned that skill over 9 years of marriage, the ability to track a person with your peripheral vision while your eyes pointed somewhere neutral. He was standing with his back partially toward me, shoulders tight, head slightly bowed, while Whitmore spoke in low, rapid sentences close to his ear. Marcus kept shaking his head. Not the short, tight refusal from earlier. These were slower, heavier movements, the head shaking of a man being told things he already knew but had been hoping someone would contradict. Whitmore put one hand on Marcus's shoulder. Marcus stepped back from it. That one small movement told me more than anything either of them had said out loud. Whitmore was Marcus's attorney, not his ally, and Marcus had just remembered that. Whatever Whitmore was advising him to do right now, he was advising it because it was legally optimal, not because it protected Marcus from pain. And Marcus, standing there in his charcoal suit with his cufflinks catching the light, was finally processing the difference. Eleanor was writing something on her legal pad beside me. Without looking up, she said quietly, "Victoria left." I turned slightly. The third row from the back was empty. The dark green dress was gone. Sometime in the last 14 minutes, while my father's words were still settling into the walls of this courtroom, Victoria Harmon had gathered her phone and her composure and walked out through the back door. I did not feel satisfaction about that. I felt something more complicated and more honest, a recognition that the thing she had been celebrating for months had just revealed itself to be something other than what she had thought it was. She had believed she was winning a wealthy man. What she had been winning, it turned out, was a man whose wealth was about to be significantly renegotiated, whose professional reputation was cracked down the middle, and whose most valuable asset, the building he ran his business from, belonged to his ex-wife. I wondered if she had known about the offshore accounts. I wondered if any of what Marcus had shown her over the past 2 years had been the truth, or if she had simply been a more sophisticated version of what I had been, someone who believed the story he was telling because he told it so convincingly. I decided that wasn't my question to answer. I had enough of my own. "Mr. Langston," Judge Foster addressed the room without warmth, "your time is up. Please return to your seat." Marcus walked back to the plaintiff's table with the particular gait of a man who is concentrating on appearing normal. He sat down. He folded his hands on the table in front of him. He did not look at me. Whitmore stood. "Your Honor, my client has reviewed the newly presented documentation and acknowledges that certain financial disclosures in the original filing were incomplete." "Incomplete," Judge Foster repeated. The word landed in the room like something dropped from a height. "My client is prepared to make full disclosure of all previously unreported accounts and assets and to enter into revised settlement negotiations that reflect the complete financial picture of both parties." That is the minimum the law requires of him, Mr. Whitmore, not a concession. Judge Foster's voice had an edge that could have cut glass. "What I am interested in is whether your client understands the full scope of what incomplete means in this context." She looked directly at Marcus. "Mr. Langston, you will answer this question yourself. Did you deliberately conceal assets during these proceedings with the intent to reduce your wife's settlement?" The room held its breath. Marcus stared at the table for 3 seconds. Then he looked up at Judge Foster and said, "Yes." It was the first completely honest thing he had said in that courtroom. Whitmore closed his eyes briefly. I heard the small, involuntary sound, not quite a wince, but close, of a lawyer watching his client do the thing he had specifically advised him not to do. But Marcus had apparently decided, somewhere in those 14 minutes, that the performance was over, that whatever came next, it was going to be built on something true. I did not feel the rush of victory I had expected. What I felt was quieter and stranger than that, something close to grief, but not quite. The grief-adjacent feeling of watching someone you once loved completely reveal the exact dimensions of how lost they had become. "Your Honor," Eleanor said, rising, "given Mr. Langston's admission, we'd like to formally present our proposed settlement terms." "Proceed." Eleanor placed a single clean document on the table and began reading. I had reviewed every line of it with her the previous afternoon, sitting in her office with the window open and the sound of afternoon traffic coming through, going over each item until I understood not just what I was asking for, but why each piece was legally justified and morally fair. I had not wanted to be punitive. I had wanted to be accurate. Marcus would retain Langston Strategic Group and all legitimately disclosed business assets. His professional future was his own. I had no interest in destroying what he had built. He would retain his personal accounts and personal property, minus the Range Rover, which had been purchased using commingled marital funds during the period when he had been simultaneously hiding income offshore. He would vacate the Frisco house within 30 days. I would retain full ownership of all inherited assets, the $9 million in real estate, partnerships, and investment accounts. I would retain the house outright, with a mortgage to be paid off immediately from a portion of the estate. I would receive $225,000 in damages for emotional distress, financial manipulation, and the documented years of deliberate dependency he had engineered in our marriage. And Marcus would make full disclosure of all concealed accounts to both the court and to the IRS within 45 days. "That last item is non-negotiable," Eleanor said clearly. Whitmore leaned toward Marcus. Marcus shook his head once. "It's fine," he said, loud enough for the room to hear. "All of it. It's fine." Judge Foster looked at him over her glasses. "Mr. Langston, you are accepting this settlement in full?" "Yes, Your Honor. You understand that your admission of deliberate asset concealment is now part of the court record, and that I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for review of potential criminal fraud charges?" Whitmore shot to his feet. "Your Honor, my client's cooperation with full disclosure should be considered as—" "It will be considered," Judge Foster said, "along with everything else. That determination is not mine to make alone." She returned her attention to Marcus. "Do you understand what I've just said?" "Yes," Marcus said. He was looking at his hands. "Good." She picked up her gavel. "This court accepts the settlement as proposed by Mrs. Langston's counsel. Mr. Langston will comply with all terms within the specified timeframes. Failure to disclose all concealed accounts within 45 days will result in immediate escalation to criminal proceedings." She looked between both tables one final time. "This divorce is granted." The gavel came down. For a moment, I didn't move. I sat in my chair with my hands folded in my lap and the sound of the gavel still resonating in my chest. And I let the reality of the last 2 hours settle into something I could actually hold. It was over. Not just the hearing, all of it. The 9 years of making myself smaller, the careful management of my own wants and ambitions and professional identity to fit inside the space Marcus had decided was available for me. The loneliness of a marriage that had stopped being a partnership so gradually that I hadn't noticed the exact moment it happened, only the accumulated distance of 100 small surrenders. Eleanor put her hand over mine. "Sophia." I looked at her. "You did it," she said. I nodded. But what I was thinking was, Dad did it. He did it 15 years ago in a lawyer's office on a Tuesday afternoon with his overnight shift starting in 6 hours and a daughter he loved more than any number he had ever put on a balance sheet. I stood up from the table and turned toward the gallery, and Raymond Foster was already there, just inside the low gate, and the expression on his face was the closest thing I had seen in 4 years to the expression my father used to give me when I had done something he was proud of. Warm and certain and just slightly undone at the edges. "He knew," I said when I reached him. My voice came out rougher than I expected. "He knew it would work out like this." "He believed it would," Raymond said. "There's a difference. He trusted you to get yourself to the point where it could." He put a hand briefly on my shoulder. "He would have loved to see this morning." "I know," I said. "I know he would have." From behind me, I heard Marcus's voice, not addressing the room, addressing me. "Sophia." I turned around. He was standing a few feet away, without Whitmore, without the polished management of his expression. Just Marcus, the real one. The one I had occasionally caught glimpses of in the early years before the money and the ambition had finished building the persona that had replaced him. He looked tired in a way that went deeper than one difficult morning. "I need you to know," he said, "that I understand what I did. Not just the legal part, all of it. What I turned you into in that marriage." He stopped. "I told myself a story about who you were, and I chose to keep believing it because it was convenient, because it made what I was doing easier to justify." I looked at him for a long moment. "I know you believe that right now," I said, "and maybe it's even true, but Marcus, understanding something after you get caught is not the same as the courage it takes to be honest before the consequences arrive. You only know what you did because a retired judge just read my father's letter out loud in a courtroom." I paused. "That's not growth. That's arithmetic." He didn't have an answer for that. I hadn't expected him to. "I hope you figure out who you actually are without the performance," I said. "I genuinely mean that. But I'm not going to be the person who helps you do it." I turned and walked toward the exit, with Eleanor on one side and Raymond on the other, and I did not look back. The hallway outside the courtroom was cooler and quieter, and I stopped walking once the door had closed behind us and just breathed for a moment, in through the nose, out through the mouth. My hands were completely steady. "What do you need right now?" Eleanor asked. "Food," I said. "I haven't eaten since yesterday afternoon." She laughed. It was a real laugh, the slightly surprised laugh of someone who was expecting a more dramatic answer, and it broke something open in me that had been held tightly closed for weeks. And I laughed too, standing in that courthouse hallway with my father's letter in my jacket pocket and $9 million of his quiet love waiting in a folder in Raymond Foster's briefcase. And I laughed until my eyes watered, and Eleanor had to put her hand on my arm to keep me anchored. "There's a diner 2 blocks from here," Raymond said, with the dignity of a man completely comfortable with emotional releases of all varieties. "Your father and I ate there after every major meeting for 15 years. He always ordered the same thing." "What did he order?" I asked. "Scrambled eggs, wheat toast, black coffee, and a slice of whatever pie they had that day." Raymond smiled. He said a man who has just done something important owes himself pie. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand. "Then let's go," I said. "I think I've earned pie." We walked out of the courthouse into the full morning light, the 3 of us, and I felt my father's presence so clearly beside me that I had to breathe through it, not as absence this time, but as company. The particular warmth of someone who loved you so thoroughly and so far in advance that even their love for you outlasted their life. Marcus Langston had walked into that courtroom 8 weeks ago with everything mapped and managed and calibrated to a result he considered inevitable. He had looked across a mahogany table at a woman he had spent 9 years convincing herself she was nothing, and he had seen exactly what he had been prepared to see. A woman with no resources, no leverage, and no real choice but to accept what he was offering. He had not seen my father. He had not seen the 15 years of careful, invisible architecture that my father had built, pointing in one direction, toward one person, for one purpose: to make sure that when the moment came when I finally needed to know what I was made of, I would also know exactly what I had. The diner was warm and smelled like coffee and bacon and fresh bread, and we took a table by the window and Raymond ordered for all three of us: scrambled eggs, wheat toast, black coffee, and 3 slices of the peach pie they had behind the counter. And when the food came, I ate every single bite. For the first time in 9 years, I was hungry. The peach pie was extraordinary, which felt like my father's doing. Raymond told stories about him over breakfast, real ones, the kind that don't get told at funerals because they're too specific and too alive. He told me about the first time Dad had walked into his office with a manila folder of handwritten notes and a savings account balance that most people would have spent 3 times over already, asking careful questions about real estate structures and partnership agreements and tax-efficient holding entities, and how Raymond had spent the first 20 minutes of that meeting trying to figure out if this quiet man in work clothes was genuinely sophisticated or just confidently uninformed. By the end of the hour, he had his answer. He asked questions that most of my corporate clients never think to ask, Raymond said, about long-term liability, about what happens to assets when the primary holder dies unexpectedly, about how to structure things so that the transfer of wealth doesn't also transfer dependency. He looked at me. He had been thinking about you from the very beginning. Every single decision. Where to invest, how to hold it, when to reveal it, all of it was designed around one question: what does Sophia need and when does she need it? I put my fork down. He never told me he was proud of me, I said. Not in those words. He'd say things like, "That's my girl," or "Your mama would have loved that," but never directly. I used to wish he'd just say it plainly. Raymond smiled. He told me every time I saw him. He'd give me an update on your life like I was a shareholder receiving a quarterly report, what you were working on, what you'd figured out, where he thought you were heading. And then he'd always end the same way. He paused. He'd say, "She doesn't know yet what she's capable of, but she will. I'm making sure of it." I pressed my fingers against the bridge of my nose and breathed carefully through the wave that came with that. He was right, Raymond said quietly. He was absolutely right. We finished breakfast. Eleanor left first. She had 2 other clients that afternoon and the organized life of a woman who runs on schedules and doesn't apologize for it. She hugged me at the door, a real hug, the kind that communicates more than words efficiently manage, and she said, "Call me next week. We have paperwork, and then after the paperwork, we celebrate properly." I told her I would. Raymond walked me to my car. At the door of the parking structure, he stopped and handed me a small, sealed envelope I hadn't seen him carry before, my name on the front in my father's handwriting. I looked at it. "Another letter?" "A short one," Raymond said. "He asked me to give it to you after everything was resolved, not before. He didn't want it to feel like instruction. He wanted it to feel like a conclusion." I held it in both hands for a moment. "Did you read it?" "He read it to me when he wrote it," Raymond said. "It is exactly what you need to hear today, and nothing more." He shook my hand with both of his, the same warm grip from the first morning I had walked into his office. "Your father would want you to know that he considered working with you these past weeks one of the great privileges of his professional life. And I mean that as a statement about who you are, not just what you survived." I watched him walk back toward the street, and I stood alone in the parking structure, holding the envelope. I opened it. 3 sentences. Classic Dad. Everything necessary, nothing extra. You did it exactly the way I knew you would. Now stop looking backward. The whole road is in front of you, sweetheart. I read it 4 times. Then I folded it and put it in my jacket pocket with the first letter, both of them resting against my heart the whole drive home. The house felt different when I walked in. It had felt wrong for months. the particular wrongness of a space that has absorbed the emotional residue of a deteriorating marriage, where every room holds a version of a conversation that ended badly, or a silence that lasted too long. I had been dreading coming back to it after the hearing. I had expected to walk through the door and feel the weight of everything that had happened inside these walls pressing down on me the same way it always had. Instead, I felt space. Not emptiness. Space. The difference matters. Emptiness is absence. Space is possibility. I sat down on the couch and did something I hadn't done in longer than I could honestly account for. I sat still, and I let myself think about what I actually wanted. Not what was practical, not what was safe, not what fit inside someone else's vision of who I was and what I was worth. What I, Sophia Ann Carter, actually wanted from the years that were ahead of me. The marketing work was the first thing that came clearly. Not freelance projects scraped together for inconsistent income, not supporting someone else's business from the supporting role he had written for me. A real firm, my own, the kind I had been building toward before I stepped back, before I convinced myself that Marcus's ambitions were large enough to hold us both. Before I learned the hard way that when someone asks you to make yourself smaller, they are not making room for you, they are making room for themselves. I had the resources now, I had the time, and sitting in that quiet house with my father's 2 letters in my pocket, I had something harder to quantify, but more essential than either, the absolute bone-deep certainty that I was not starting over. I was starting correctly, for the first time. I called Eleanor the next morning. I want to set up a business entity, I said, a marketing and brand strategy firm. I want my father's name in it. Carter Creative, she said immediately. Carter Creative, I confirmed. I'll have the incorporation paperwork ready by Thursday. 3 weeks later, I signed the documents in Eleanor's office with Raymond as the witness, and when I put my signature on the line that read, Sophia Ann Carter, Principal, I felt something settle into place that had been loose and rattling for 9 years. I found the office space the following week, 8th floor of a building in uptown Dallas, one of my father's buildings, as it turned out, which Raymond had noted with the kind of quiet satisfaction that suggested he had anticipated this particular coincidence. My father had built commercial space all over this city without anyone knowing it was him, and now his daughter was going to build something inside it with his name on the door. I sat in the empty office on the first day with the keys in my hand and told him out loud, to the room, to the city visible through the window, that I was going to make him proud. I said it plainly, the way he had never quite managed to say it to me. I thought he would have appreciated the directness. The first thing I did after signing the lease was call 3 former colleagues from my marketing days, people I had maintained thin, apologetic contact with over the years, the kind of contact that says, I haven't forgotten you, but I don't quite deserve to be here anymore. I called them, and I said clearly, without preamble, I'm building something. I need people who are excellent and honest and unafraid of real work. Are you interested? All 3 said yes before I finished the sentence. The second thing I did was establish the Carter Foundation for Working Families. Raymond had been quietly preparing the nonprofit structure for weeks, anticipating that I would want it. It was funded through a portion of the investment accounts my father had left, dedicated to educational scholarships and skills training for children and adults from working-class communities in the DFW area. The first board meeting was held in a conference room I borrowed from Raymond's firm, 6 people around a table, and when we voted on the foundation's mission statement, I read my father's words from his first letter. That part about wanting to lift people up rather than step on them, and used it as the opening line of our organizational charter. The first scholarship class was 14 students. By the end of the first year, it was 81. By the second year, we were funding after-school programs in 6 school districts and adult retraining cohorts in 4 community colleges across the metro. I heard about Marcus in pieces, the way you hear about someone whose life has moved permanently into a different lane than yours. Not through direct contact, but through the peripheral information that a shared city generates without anyone particularly trying. His business had contracted significantly in the months following the hearing. 3 major clients had quietly moved their accounts elsewhere, apparently deciding that the public record of deliberate financial fraud was not a character reference they wanted associated with their own companies. Whitmore's firm had also withdrawn from representing him, citing an undisclosed conflict, which in practical terms meant they had run the numbers and determined that Marcus Langston was no longer a client whose fees justified his complications. Victoria had left Dallas entirely. A colleague mentioned seeing her LinkedIn profile updated with a position at a firm in Atlanta, the new city, the clean start, the professional pivot that is the modern language for, I need to be somewhere no one knows what happened. I did not wish her badly. I did not wish her anything much at all. She had made choices, and she was living inside them, the same as the rest of us. Marcus called once. 7 months after the divorce was finalized, on a Sunday afternoon in October, when the light was doing that specific golden Texas thing that it does in fall, and I was sitting in my new house, a craftsman bungalow in a historic neighborhood in East Dallas, warm and particular and entirely mine, reading a book and drinking coffee that I had made exactly the way I liked it. I saw his name on the screen, and I held the phone for a moment, and I thought about what Eleanor had said to me during the hardest week of all of it. Whatever he says, whatever he offers, remember what he actually thought of you when he believed no one was watching. Then I set the phone face down on the cushion beside me and let it ring until it stopped. He did not call again. That choice, not answering, not explaining, not offering him the closure that would have cost me the peace I had just finished building, was one of the most important things I have ever done. Not because it was punishing, because it was honest. There was nothing Marcus Langston and I needed to say to each other that had not already been said in that courtroom with all the necessary witnesses present. The thing about rebuilding your life after someone has spent years quietly dismantling it is that the rebuilding does not announce itself. There is no single morning where you wake up and the damage is gone and the new thing is fully formed. It happens in increments so small that you only notice them in retrospect. The first time you make a decision without checking to see if it will be approved. The first time you spend money on something you want without calculating what someone else will think. The first time you sit in a room full of people and feel, simply and without qualification, that you belong there. For me, one of those moments came 8 months after the divorce at the ribbon cutting for the Carter Foundation's first community education center. It was a converted building in Garland, 3 miles from the rental house where Dad had lived, renovated with a children's library and a computer lab and a kitchen big enough to run cooking and nutrition classes for families. Raymond was there. Eleanor was there. My 3 original colleagues from Carter Creative were there. 81 scholarship students and their families were there. I stood at the podium and looked at the name on the building, James Earl Carter Education Center. And I thought about my father driving to that depot at 11 p.m. 5 nights a week for 25 years. And I thought about the meetings he had taken in the margins of that life, the buildings he had quietly purchased, the documents he had filed and organized and sealed in a manila envelope for a daughter who didn't know yet that she would need them. I thought about a man who had worked the overnight shift and built an empire and never once asked for credit, because the credit was never the point. The point was standing at a podium with her name on a foundation and her father's name on a building and 3 letters of incorporation in her office drawer and 81 kids getting the kind of support that changes the direction of a life. My father was a truck mechanic, I said into the microphone. He worked nights. He lived in a house 2 miles from here that he rented for 30 years. He bought his work boots on sale in November. I paused. He also built half the commercial real estate you drove past on your way here this morning, and he did it without ever once telling anyone, because he was not interested in being impressive. He was interested in being useful. I looked at the building with his name on it. This is for him, and everything I build from here is for him, because the best thing you can do with a gift that somebody left you in the dark is walk straight into the light with it. After the ceremony, Raymond found me near the back of the room. He handed me a coffee and stood beside me quietly for a moment, watching the families move through the newly opened space. Children pulling books from shelves, parents reading the program descriptions on the walls. "You know what he would say right now," Raymond said, "if he were here." "That's my girl," I said. Raymond smiled. Word for word. I held my coffee with both hands and felt the warmth of it, and the warmth of the room, and the warmth of everything my father had spent a lifetime building toward. And I understood completely and finally why he had never said it plainly in those exact words when he was alive. He hadn't needed to. Every decision he had ever made had said it for him. Every carefully structured partnership, every sealed envelope, every strategic late-night meeting scheduled between overnight shifts, every year of quiet, invisible, extravagant love. He had been saying it the whole time. I just hadn't had the ears for it yet. Marcus Langston had signed those divorce papers with a smirk and the unshakable certainty that he was walking away from a woman who had nothing. He had been wrong about everything that mattered. Wrong about my father, wrong about my worth, wrong about what I was capable of, when someone finally handed me back the full picture of who I had always been. But I am not telling this story because of Marcus. I am telling it because of a man who worked nights and said nothing and built everything, and who loved his daughter with the kind of patience and foresight that most people don't have the discipline to sustain for 15 years. I am James Carter's daughter. I always was. I just finally know what that means. And that is where the real story begins.